This morning I'd like to share with you the story about King Baudouin of Belgium. And I came across this story that in the last month because Pope Francis visited Belgium there. I don't really know how to pronounce his name, but I'm just going to say Baudouin. He was the king of the Belgians for over 40 years, from 1951 to 1993. And as you know, that was a time of great change and upheaval in the world and in his own country. And through it all, Baudouin carried out his duties with complete devotion to his country and to his Catholic faith. He was married to Queen Fabiola, who was also a devout Catholic. Sadly, they experienced 5 miscarriages and no live births of their children. Still, they maintained their faith in God and found strength in the Eucharist, and they would go together to daily Mass. His greatest trial as a leader happened in 1990 during a political crisis that would shake the very constitution of his nation, and the issue was around abortion. In March of that year, the Belgian parliament approved the legalization of abortion up to 4 months in the pregnancies. The Constitution required that the king sign all the legislation, and this was really a formality because for the last 160 years, every piece of legislation was signed. But King Baudouin decided that he would follow his conscience, and he refused to sign it, since it undermined the most basic principle of any civilized society, the right to life of all innocent human persons. And he didn't undertake this lightly. He prayed a lot about it. He sought counsel. He went on a pilgrimage. He asked many wise people, including his wife, what he should do. And finally, he made his choice and announced it to those who were, affected. So now they had a crisis. What were they going to do? And to resolve it, he voluntarily stepped down from the throne. And then they signed it into law, and then they asked him to come back, and he reigned for 3 more years until his early death. But in the years since then, King Baudouin has been held up as a model. Pope John Paul II praised him in 1995, saying, quote, "He was a great guardian of the rights of the human conscience, ready to defend the divine commandments, and especially the 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill, especially with regard to the protection of the life of unborn children," close quote. And then a month ago, Pope Francis, as I said, he went to Belgium. He visited the tomb of this king, and he praised Baudouin's courage for choosing to, quote, "leave his place as king in order not to sign a murderous law." And Pope Francis expressed his desire that maybe one day he might be canonized a saint. Unlike King Baudouin, we are neither royalty nor are we political authorities, at least most of us. Like him, however, we are Christians, disciples of Christ, called to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. We are called to live, promote, and defend the moral law which has been written by God on each and every human heart. And this law is expressed in the 10 Commandments, as we heard in our first reading, and summarized by the Lord Jesus in the gospel today. When they asked him, what is the first commandment? He said, the first is this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is like it: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And these two summarize the 10 Commandments, because the first 3 deal with loving God, and the last 7 deal with loving our neighbor. We have to be convinced that the moral law promotes human flourishing and upholds the common good of our families, of our local community, and of our nation. And this means we need to be clear and have steadfast opposition to the anti-life, anti-family, and anti-religion agenda, which is destroying individual lives, families, communities, and our nation. As citizens, we have the right to direct constructive criticism to our civil authorities and the right to make our voices heard, and yet far too often we are silent when we should speak out. We also have the right and the duty to vote for our elected officials, from the president down to our local leaders. And voting is a moral act, meaning it can be morally good or morally bad, and that we are responsible before God for our decision. There are many issues that we must weigh in making a prudential judgment and casting our vote. It's not easy. It's never been easy. And every year that goes by, it becomes even harder than the last year. But we do have some guidance. The U.S. bishops and the Pope himself have said that the preeminent issue in our country today is the intentional killing of the unborn. And that is especially true in our state of Kansas, because just in the past few years, the numbers of abortions have skyrocketed from 7,000 to this year, 21,000. It has tripled in just the last few years. And a couple weeks ago, we had our clergy conference, and the priest who's in Pittsburgh got up and told us about the abortion clinic they opened down there and what that's doing to their community. It's very sad. Imagine if it happened to us. We need to be clear that this is a moral crime that we should do everything we can to stop. It doesn't matter if it's legal in our state, it doesn't matter if it's legal in the entire world. It is a violation of God's law, and therefore it is always a moral crime that we have the obligation to oppose. And I'm deeply aware of the tragedy that is involved with every abortion, having counseled men and women involved in these tragic decisions, and I grieve for them. And to these people, we owe our prayers for their healing and their forgiveness before God. But with God's grace, we have to work to change the hearts and laws of our state toward the culture of life. God has chosen each and every one of us to be alive at this time and place for a reason, so we don't have to question that. And like King Baudouin, we should witness to the dignity of every human life and uphold the moral law, no matter what the demands are. And finally, we should live in hope. Far too often, we act like Chicken Little and like the sky is going to fall down upon us, but that's not a Christian attitude, right? We live in the hope of what the Lord has offered to us. Jesus, our high priest, as we heard in our second reading, lives forever to make intercession for us. And so let us live in hope and continue to live out our principles as faithful Catholics.